Friendaphone, Chapter 7. The boys stood in the drizzle, calling and whistling for Jip, and then, from high up on the hills, came a familiar barking. It seemed to be coming from the cairn, a massive pile of granite rocks that dominated the valley like some prehistoric fortress. Tucky whistled again, and back came Yip's reassuring bark. And then they saw him, standing up on the cairn by the sky, his body shaking as he barked. Tucky set off up the hill with David in close pursuit, and Jip jumped down from the rocks and bounced down towards them, tail bobbing, tongue hanging out. Jip could climb where they could not and ran on ahead, turning every so often to make sure that they were following. Tucky stopped to catch his breath. "You up there? We got your food." For some moments there was no response. "Come up!" It was a German's voice that was behind the rocks. There was no doubt about that. Tucky waited for David and they went on up together. It was a small grassy clearing encircled by great boulders, and in one corner a giant granite slab had fallen across the walls to form a roof. It reminded David of pictures he'd seen on Stonehenge, only smaller. One German was lying down under the roof, covered in blankets, and the other stood beside him, stroking Yip. We thought you'd gone," Tucky said. "You didn't tell us you were moving." "The plane that came over yesterday," he said. "I thought it could have seen us. It was a good thing. There were soldiers out yesterday, just the other side of the river. We are safe here now." David was looking at the other airman, who was struggling to sit up. "Your friend, is he worse?" "Not good. Not good. Very ill. You have brought the brandy?" "Whiskey," said David. There was no brandy. He handed him the bottle. "Thank you, my friend." The German's face broke into half smile. "It will be a help." He was even paler than the day before, and his beard had grown darker. He knelt down beside his friend and helped him to sit up. He tilted the bottle, and the boys watched the injured German drink it as if it was water. Twice his whole body was shaken by violent coughing fits, but still he came back for more until finally he pushed it away. He leant back against the rocks, nodded at the two boys and smiled his thanks. Tucky put the pillowcase down inside the shelter and stood back. "We won't bring any more," David said suddenly, when they had finished emptying the pillowcase. They ate on as if he had said nothing, ripping open the tins of corned beef and shoveling the meat directly from the tin into his mouth. David said it louder. "We've done enough. There won't be any more, you understand?" The German nodded as he finished his mouthful and wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve. "You have done more than enough. It is good that we can help each other in these sad times. It is good." We only did it because you helped us," David said. "That's all, we're still enemies." "No, I don't think so." He looked up and smiled. "I am wearing the uniform of your enemy, but we are not enemies, not anymore." "We must take Jip now," David said, wanting it to be over. "We were sent out to find Jip. We've got to get back." The airman got to his feet slowly, holding out his hand to stop them. "Please," he said, "there is one last thing." "No!" David was almost shouting. "It's finished. I've paid you back, haven't I? We won't do anymore. Do you understand? No more." "Please." The German took a step closer and the boys backed away. "We want no more food, no more anything." "Come on, Tucky," David turned to go. "I'm going." "I want you to take my friend with you," said the German quietly, "as your prisoner. He has agreed. He is not well enough to go with me over the moor. I hoped food and warmth would help, but it hasn't. He wishes to go with you as your prisoner." "You want us to take him? Hand him over to the army?" Tucky said. Pictures of him leading a captured German pilot through the village, with crowds cheering and church bells pealing, came swarming into mind. Their faces, the look on their faces. "How far is it?" the German asked. "How far?" David was still trying to take it all in. "To your home, to your village." "But it's not exactly our home," he said. "We're evacuees. From London, mister. To get away from the bombs," Tucky answered for him. The man nodded knowingly and looked hard at David. From London. I am sorry, my friends. Perhaps when you are older, you will understand that we all do things we know we should not do. But perhaps you have learnt that already. David looked away. It takes over an hour, he said, but it's downhill most of the way. To begin with, I will go with you. Gert, my friend, he cannot walk too far. I will come help carry him. He's a big man, too heavy for you. I think you will take him? We will, won't we, Davy? Chucky was eager. All right, David said, but no one must see you. You won't make it, you know. Make it? Over the moor. It's 30 miles of hills, bogs and rivers, and the army trains are all over it. They'll catch you, and if they don't, the moor will kill you. Will you tell them about me? David shook his head. There's no need. Mr. Reynolds says no one can cross the moor from north to south without a map or a compass. And without knowing the moor, you'll never do it. In planes we navigate by the stars, he said. The moor may be big, but not as big as the sky. I will try, anyway. I have to try. If you were away from home and wanted to get back, you would try, wouldn't you? They started off down the hill, Jip prancing on ahead, sniffing at every rabbit hole. Tucky carried both the blankets over his shoulder and kept looking round every few yards to make sure the two Germans were still behind them. David stuffed the pillowcase inside his jumper and wondered how they were going to explain away the blankets to Mr. Reynolds. The deception was getting too complicated. Something must go wrong. He was sure of it. The boys found themselves walking too fast for the airmen, who needed to stop to rest from time to time. The engine rod was being carried, slung over his friend's shoulder in a fireman's lift. David and Tucky sat on a rock and waited for them to catch up. It was still drizzling, and the German found it difficult to keep his feet as he came down towards them. He plodded on past them, and David saw the effort on his face and a look of grim determination. What are we going to say? David had made up his mind. We bumped into them by accident. No need to lie anymore, Tucky. Well, that's just it, Tucky went on. There's two of them, and we're only bringing one of them in. What are we going to do about the other one? How are we going to tell them, or what? I don't know. David got up and followed the Germans. David stopped them when they reached the low stone wall that separated the moor from the farm. And here, the airman lowered his friend gently to his feet. They talked to each other briefly in German, then shook hands solemnly. You will look after him, please, he said. He needs a doctor. You will make sure that he has a doctor. Of course we will, Tucky said excitedly. Of course we won't, we, Davy? David nodded in agreement. So, he's your prisoner now. And he felt deep into the inside of his coat and pulled out the black revolver. You will need this, he said, handing it to David. It was cold and heavy, heavier than David had imagined. It is loaded, but the safety catch is on. Be careful with it, please. David balanced it in his hand and gripped the butt, his finger curling round the trigger. I could make you come too, he said. Of course, David, the man nodded, but friends do not use guns on each other. He held out his hand to David. David looked down at the outstretched hand and took it. Goodbye, David. And you too, Tucky. Auf Wiedersehen. Bye, said David. And good luck, Tucky shouted after him. But the German was already striding away into the rain, head bent forward, the collar of his coat turned to cover his neck. Mr. Reynolds was in the yard, bringing in the sows. He heard footsteps behind him, and then Jip was nuzzling his legs. So, you little devil, you found him then, my dears? He had still not turned around. Dogs like horses, got minds of their own. We found him, Mr. Reynolds, said Tucky, and someone else, look. Mr. Reynolds turned and stared. Your plane? From your plane, is he? He could hardly believe what he was looking at. Jip found him, Mr. Reynolds. He's a German bomber pilot. I can see that, my dear, I can see that. He looked up, the German up and down, and then he noticed the revolver David was holding in his hands. Now give that thing to me, dear, give it to me, he said, and he walked round the German, keeping his distance and taking the revolver from David. Anne, he called out, not taking his eyes off the German. Anne, come over here, come out here now. He was pointing the revolver at the German now and waving him towards the cottage. Your plane. Must have been your plane, right? Most for certain. You were right, my days. Right after all. Does he speak English? No, Tucky said. He was longing to see Anne's face when she saw. He's limping, isn't he? Of course, he's been out on the moor for the best part of the week. No, should be more now, wouldn't it? Looks half-starved, doesn't he? Anne! Anne threw open the door and came running out, her hands white with flour. She stopped dead, and a hand shot through her mouth. German pilot, she said, from our plane. We found him out on the moor. Jip found him, David said quickly. Did he hurt you? Anne had gone white. Gentle as a lamb by the look of him, said Mr. Reynolds. But the gun, said Anne. The gun. How did he get the gun? Just gave up himself up, David said. He can hardly walk, and he's tired out and he's coughing. He should see a doctor. The van, my dear. Get the van out, said Mr. Reynolds. Take it up to the village and get Captain Stardy. If it's not there, then ring up the army at Oakenhampton. Then send someone out, but be quick as you can now. We'll look after him here, won't we, my dears? Anne came closer to the German and looked up into his face. Just people. Just ordinary people like you and me. In the warmth of the kitchen, the German sat in Anne's chair by the stove, holding a mug of tea in his hands and shivering. Mr. Reynolds nursed a revolver, shaking his head. And the blankets? Anne said. I don't understand about the blankets, she said slowly. Yeah, there are, no doubt about that one. That green one. I've seen that one on my bed before now, I'm most certain. It was on my bed for years. We found all sorts up there, David spoke back confidently. We brought them all back. The blankets, the bottle of whiskey, this pillowcase. He must have taken them. Come here and taken them. David had thought it all out as they came across the fields, and the story came out now convincingly. Mr. Reynolds nodded thoughtfully, but didn't say anything. And the plane, he asked. No sign of the plane, I suppose. We looked all around. There was nothing, not even a sign. Crashed into a bog, Tucky blurted out, and David winced. They'd agreed David would be the spokesperson, and Tucky would keep quiet. How do you know that, my dear? Mr. Reynolds looked up sharply. He could have told you. Doesn't speak English, does he? He doesn't know, not really, David said, willing Tucky to keep his mouth shut. Tucky's just guessing, that's all. Didn't see what else must have happened, though. We reckoned it must have crashed and then sank in a bog. That's what we thought, anyway. Mr. Reynolds nodded. There is that, I suppose. 'Tis a possibility, no doubt. And did you see any sign of anyone else up there, Germans, I mean? I was thinking that there's more than one man in a bomber crew. And it wasn't a bomber, was it? David nodded. The question was too close, and Mr. Reynolds was talking strangely. He was suspicious. David was sure of it. Now, there's as many as 6 or 8 in one of their bombers. That's as far as I know. Certainly more than one. I wonder what happened to all the others. Dead. They are all dead. It was a German who spoke. David and Tucky looked at him in amazement. You speak English? Said Tucky. I speak English, said the German, leaning back in the chair and shut his eyes. I speak very good English. And he did. But I thought... Tucky remembered Mr. Reynolds. That's the first time, Mr. Reynolds. Honest, he's never said a word in English before. Not a word. Mr. Reynolds got up from the table and crouched down by the German's chair. The other men in the plane, he said. Are they all dead? All of them, the German said, opening his eyes and looking at Mr. Reynolds. All of them, dead. My plane sunk under the ground and there was no time. I could not get them out. And the blankets, Mr. Reynolds held up the one that was drying by the stove. Where did you get these from? David and Tucky held their breath. David felt his nails biting into the palms of his hands and his heart was pounding in his ears. I was cold and I was hungry. He spoke clearly. I stole them. This afternoon and yesterday afternoon I came here. The house was empty. There was no one here. I took blankets, eggs, whiskey, anything I could find. I am sorry to steal from your house, but when a man is hungry, he will do anything. I had to eat. Mr. Reynolds straightened up and put his hands on his hips. You were bombing Plymouth last week. I can say nothing about that. The German leant back and closed his eyes again. Well, my dears, Mr. Reynolds was smiling. Beginning to understand it now. Jip must have followed him back out onto the moor, and I sent you two after Jip. Well, I'll be blowed. You won't believe it, would you? I'll tell you something. They'll never believe it in the village, my dears, not till they see him anyway. He looked at the German and back at the boys. Well, I'll be blowed. I'll be blowed. The German had cleared them on every count, and the boys could relax for the first time. David was tempted to catch his eye, to thank him, but he dared not take the risk. There was no point in spoiling it now, not just for a gesture. He felt Tucky smiling at him confidently, and he ignored him. They were safe, but he felt no triumph, only relief. That's the end of chapter 7. Friend off.